The American author Glennon Doyle says, truth-telling is something that can unlock people. Every time we tell our own truth, for some reason others feel able to tell theirs, and that is where healing begins. It's not always easy, though, to find the courage to speak your true story, but thankfully, for thousands of Australians addicted to alcohol, Shanna Whan found the courage to speak hers. Hi, Shanna. Hello.
Hello, Miss Kel. How are you?
Thank you so much. You're so very gracious for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
It's entirely my pleasure, and I tell you what, we probably wouldn't have been able to do this without Zoom and COVID and everything else, so it's lovely.
I know, and I know that everybody's going to have their own COVID experience, but I am, and I'm sure you are too, feeling so grateful to live where we live right now.
Honestly, yes, I really am, actually. Initially, I was horrified and shocked and a bit disappointed, but because it changed so much so quickly for what I had planned for this year. But now I'm like, actually, it's forced me to slow down, and I'm actually very grateful for that.
Yeah. And like I said, everyone's going to have their own experience, and there are people that are locked up in little apartments in town, and so just for us being able to be out and living our isolated way of life as we do every day is just, very amazing.
Very fortunate.
Very fortunate. So Shanna, thank you.
Yeah.
I guess we'll start at the beginning because I wanted later on speak about sober in the country with you, but it came about because you were an alcoholic and what you learned. So can you just tell me where you started from, where you took your first drink, and why, I guess, what caused your downward spiral to alcoholism?
I had a wonderful childhood, much like your beautiful Amy that we just met. I was raised by very loving parents on a property, free-range bush kid, really good education, amazing opportunities. I was a blessed kid. And for me, I guess life took a few twists and turns when I went off to boarding school and then my gap year and then my university. That's where it all started to go south for me. But I was a very homesick kid at boarding school. I did not like it at all. I didn't fit in. I wasn't very socially aware. And that was the first time in my life I started feeling like a fish out of water. I just didn't feel like I belonged there. Mm-hmm. And there was a big hole in my heart that really, I don't know, it started at boarding school and in some ways it's never left, actually. But really the clincher for me was the gap year after boarding school and before university for me. I experienced some very traumatic events in that year as a very naive, very socially unaware young woman. And those traumas would go on to manifest as me seeking a way to manage that emotional pain and that sudden sort of chaotic feeling of, holy shit, what just happened in my life? Like, I was a good kid and these yucky things happened and I wasn't equipped to deal with it. And there was, without going into details, it was rape and sexual assault and things like that, but I was remotely based and I had no support and no way of dealing with those things. And what happened is I turned to drinking for courage in social situations as a young woman.
I have seen, it's interesting you say that because I have seen that happen so often, you know, in our environment. So sorry to interrupt, but yeah, that's just such a strong point, Shanna.
That's exactly right, Kel. Like many young women drink for a little bit of courage. Many young women drink to fit in. And it's, I think with country girls, we're often coming from remote situations and we might get thrust into a massive university or whatever it might be, and we're just out of our depth. Thankfully, these days in modern times, thank God, you know, technology is much better, awareness is much better, and there's zero tolerance for a lot of things we were just expected to go through back in our day. Yeah. So thank God that's not as tolerated as what it once was. But back in our day, there was very little access to information and so forth. And so I basically developed an alter ego as a wild, fearless party girl at a very young age, because I instinctively realised that if I was the loudest, the funniest, the craziest, the most fearless, it got me popularity and it got me accepted into a social situation.
So Shanna,
very quickly, yeah.
What were you really? Like that was what people saw. What was happening inside? What were you?
I was always pretty brave and pretty tough. That's not a question. But the person I presented as socially when I had alcohol on board was a very different person to who I was in a safe space with my family or my cousins or people I trusted and loved and felt nurtured by. I was much calmer. I was just at peace, being quiet. Whereas Party Shanna was really outrageous and vocal and over the top. I think it was almost like two different versions of the same person, and one was created to survive no matter what. But the real me was anything but what I presented to the world. Yeah, very different.
Yeah. I remember my first incident with alcohol. I was about 17, I think. Someone gave me a vodka and orange, and I had several of them, and it was not pretty. I'm just so very grateful that I didn't have or go into that downward spiral that you ended up going into, because it's just, it would be, I imagine it could become very easy to do, especially with what you had gone through and what you were feeling. So when did you first realise that things had gone beyond control, that you were an alcoholic?
Look, I reckon in my deepest heart of hearts, I knew in my late 20s that I was in trouble. So I sort of went from that gap year and those traumas and then into university and then into my work life. And that concurrent theme of being a party girl stayed with me, but it just escalated. And what I didn't know then that I do know now is that alcohol addiction and then alcoholism, they are progressive things. So what began over here was progressing over time and lifting in, increasing in dependence, increasing in all sorts of ways. My 20s were spent travelling and moving all over Australia and running away from myself, I now realise. And I reckon by the time I was 30, it was very obvious to me in my heart of hearts that I was not like other people, because other people had grown through this wild party phase and had married or started having children or settling down. There were still a few of us at 30 that were still, doing the wild thing, but I was definitely starting to stand out as being quite different to everybody else in that regard. And I think it was when I met Tim, before we became serious and before we became married, and he expressed concern to me in my early 30s about my drinking. Yeah, and I was like, oh, God, okay, maybe this is a bit of a problem.
So he actually brought it up with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Almost immediately he said to me, wow, what goes on with you and your drinking, Shan? Like, do you drink a lot? Yeah. Yep. Sorry, can you hear Fleabag? Sorry, she's
Fleabag. I'd like you to talk about Fleabag in a minute, but so did you take any notice of him, Shanna, or did you just have to come to that realisation, that point for yourself?
Oh, look, I took it in and I took it on board, but I deflected it and I sort of immediately defended myself by saying, what would you know? You don't know what I've experienced. You don't know what I've gone through. And I was quite offended and irrationally offended, actually, I can now see in hindsight. And again, what I know now as a 46-year-old recovered alcoholic is that most people, when they're in addiction, wherever they're at in that scale, denial walks very much hand in hand with it. And we people, whoever the person is and whatever addiction it might be, whether it's food or alcohol or gambling or pornography or whatever, most people who are addicted to a thing don't want to be that thing. It's embarrassing, it's humiliating, you feel ashamed, you feel worthless, and you've already spent half your life feeling worthless. So it's a very complex discussion, and we're very brittle, and we're very, very fragile. And we're also, to be really honest, Kel, people fighting addiction can be really manipulative and can lie to buffer their own bad behaviour. And I did that as well. So, yeah, look, it was various combinations of various things. But, yeah, look, I would safely say that I wasn't ready to deal with my drinking until it was something I'd come to the conclusion of within myself. And that's the nature of addiction. You know, there's very little anyone else can say to us or do for us until we can acknowledge it. And I wasn't ready at that age to acknowledge it. I was still pretending I was okay. So it probably, my alcoholism continued to escalate and continued to progress until my late 30s, until it nearly took my life. So something I say to people all the time, Kel, is that I didn't leave boarding school or graduate university with my life goal being to end up a crazy, raging alcoholic wanting to kill myself by the time I was 40. That all happened over a period of 20 years. It's so insidious. It's so sly. It just eats away at people in increments until it's got a hold of you and there's no escape.
So what did it look like as it took hold of you, Shanna? Because I imagine in the beginning could be, you know, you probably didn't have the opportunity to drink every day. So it was, I imagine it was just weekends, having a bit of fun, and then it just, what did it look like for you?
Yeah, so in the early days it was just partying on the weekends, following the crowd at university, whatever that might be. Yeah. And then by the time I was in my late 30s, and here's the thing, right? I did not drink every day. I did not drink during the day, and I was mostly an after 5 drinker. So, and I had always thought that alcoholics were those terrible people who drank first thing in the morning, and they drank out of a brown paper bag. Yeah. And even right until the very end for me, that wasn't what it looked like. Mm-hmm. I always managed to somehow contain myself and contain my drinking to it being an after 5 o'clock sort of a thing. Mm-hmm. But in the height of my active alcoholism, I could drink 2 bottles of wine by myself and I would crack the bottle of a third, and I never got through that third bottle because I would always get blackout drunk and pass out. So, but I didn't even drink every day at the end. So it's interesting, and one of the things I realised is that loads of people out there in Australia like me think that they might not be an alcoholic if they don't drink every day or during the day, and nothing could be further from the truth, you know. And I reckon that's half the reason I didn't seek help sooner, because I was like, well, I don't identify as one of those alcoholic people, you know.
So what is an alcoholic?
That is probably one of the most debated questions in the addictions space ever. Most professionals or laymen like me, because I'm just a layman, I'm just a garden variety recovered alcoholic, I don't present as an expert. Most of us would agree that an alcoholic is somebody who literally has no control over their own behaviour when alcohol enters the equation. When it is impacting finances, friends, family, work, health, etc., you are probably looking down the barrel of being in serious addiction. So my response is, it looks like different things to different people, but the common denominator is it controls you and you don't control it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a really great way of explaining it, I think. And hopefully people through what you're teaching people. And you are, to me, you are an expert because you've lived the experience. Who better to help educate people than someone who has been to the absolute bottom and come back up. Shanna, were you amazed that Tim hung around?
I would say with Tim and I at the age of 30, both of us probably could have done better, but there's no doubt whatsoever that by mid to late 30s, he was being put through hell on earth, as any loved one of an addict is. And to the point where I would actually say to him that I thought he should leave me, because I kind of instinctively felt like I was never going to be okay. And half the time I was contemplating suicide, and half the time I was contemplating being not deserving of such a lovely man. And it's funny, we only spoke about this the other night with his brother, and his brother said to me, and oh my goodness, and I don't even blame him, by the way, because I know plenty of Tim's friends and family did this. His brother pulled him aside and said, Tim, what are you doing? Are you sure that she is the one for you? Because this is not okay. To which Tim looked him in the eyes and said, I'm very sure. Don't ask me that again. Unbelievable. So there was a conviction deep inside Tim that he can't explain and I can't explain. He's a man with faith. He's a man with very, once he makes his mind up, that's the end of it. And he said he always knew that I would make it. I never knew that. I truly, I don't know, Kel, I can't explain it. He had such faith and such vision and such conviction that I would do what I'm doing now, that he would not give up. And that's almost a different story in itself, because it's quite extraordinary. And, you know, these days people often say, what do I do for a loved one who I'm concerned about? And I say to them, if it's destroying you, you're going to have to think about whether you can even be there, because your well-being needs to come first. And if your loved one is dragging you down and they will not change or will not ask for help, then you're going to have to come to some tough decisions here. You know, so it's which is why I would always say to Tim, mate, I can't get well. You need to leave. You need to go find a beautiful, normal woman, because I'm destroying our lives and I can't seem to stop this train. I can't. So he went against my judgment and everyone else's and just wouldn't budge. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Shanna, Tim couldn't change you, even though you just loved him, obviously, so very much, but he could see past Shanna, the alcoholic. So what was the catalyst? What changed for you that made you take stock and think, I have to do something about this?
Yeah, and that's right. Nobody with breath in their lungs could have changed me. It was up to me. Yeah. And the catalyst was the day that I finally acknowledged publicly and boldly, with no more lies or deception or pretense in me. I had to say the words, I am an alcoholic and I need help. I am not okay. And that only happened when I was about 39, I think. I have to check that. Because I had tried everything else you could possibly poke a stick at. I really had. One thing I will say for myself is that probably for 5 years in the lead up to my sobriety, my final, successful overcoming of addiction was I really wanted to get sorted out. I really wanted to not be the way I was. And I had been striving and trying and acknowledging that I wasn't okay. But the one thing I had never, ever done was to openly admit I'm an alcoholic. I am this thing, what I have become. And guess what? I need to admit it to myself and I need to admit it to the people who love me. So I stopped, excuse the French, but I stopped bullshitting myself, Kel, and I got really, really honest and I just I said the A word out loud to myself, to my husband, to my family, and I said, this is where I'm at. I'm in really big trouble. I'm going to die. And prior to then, I had been in what they call, I guess, the jumping off place, where you don't want to die really, but you don't want to live either. So you're trapped in this living hell on earth. And to get past that, and I still to this day regard my rock bottom as the best thing that ever happened to me, because it pushed me to make a decision. And it was literally, you either live or you die, and now is the time to decide that. You have run out of time. And I just had to grab that last opportunity with all my strength and become extremely vulnerable, extremely honest. I had to just expose myself and reveal the truth. And it was so much easier than I imagined, Kel.
Really?
It was, yeah.
Shanna, I read, I think it was actually in the Australian Story episode, where you said it was a miracle.
Yeah.
So that's just astounding to me, that you had that conviction, that overnight you changed from being the hopeless alcoholic to the recovered alcoholic. So tell me about that. Tell me about what that miracle, what was happening inside you, in your head, and for that to occur.
So what I would say is that it takes years to become recovered, and I need to clarify that, because some people will just lose their mind over that in itself, and I'll explain that later. So in those early days, I was very much what they call a recovering. But the miracle was that day that I went, and I drove 2.5 hours to go to an AA meeting with a friend who I had hooked up with, thanks to AA's national office, put me in touch with a girl. And I drove to meet her, and then I sat in on one of the meetings that she was the volunteer host for. And that was a very profound first step for me, because that was the day I stood up. And as I remember to this day, Tim was sitting next to me on the chair, and I was standing and I was holding his hand. And I just stood up in that meeting that day. And a lot of people will often go to meetings and not say a thing for months. Some people don't say anything ever. And I remember when my mate Ali, who's now public, so it's okay that I say her name just in case anyone's concerned, I remember when she said to me, Shanna, would you like to share? And I went, this is your opportunity. This is where the rubber hits the road, and it's either now or it's dead. And I went, bloody oath I do. And I stood up, and I just remembered taking a big breath, and Tim had never heard me say it. And I just stood up and I said, yeah, hi everyone. My name's Shanna and I'm an alcoholic. And I started laughing. And I said, why the hell have I spent so many bloody years fighting this truth? Because it's so friggin' obvious to me and everybody else that I'm an alcoholic. So today I'm going to say it, and I'm going to own it, and I'm going to declare it, and I'm going to take my friend's advice to work my guts out to get well and to come through this. And I literally was smiling from ear to ear, and everyone's going, whoa, what a weirdo. Because, you know, I was so bloody happy to have come to that point. And Tim and I drove home that night. And the miracle in it for me, Kel, is that day was the last day I ever, and I swear to God, this is just the truth. And some people refuse to accept this, which makes me a bit sad. But anyway, whatever. That was the last day I ever thought about alcohol. I've never, ever craved it or wanted it or desired it ever since that day. So that was the miracle. I was so willing, I was so ready, and I was so invested in taking my life back. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I worked so hard. I did everything that was suggested of me. I literally took a year out of my life. I put myself into isolation in 2015. I studied, I read from dusk till dawn. I removed myself from pubs and clubs and parties and picnic races. I shifted everything. We took alcohol from our home and our lives. Tim stopped drinking for that first year to support me. We literally, whatever the hell we were told to do, we did it because we knew our lives depended on it. So there was hard work and willingness and total commitment over here. But by the same token, I don't know how to say it as in any way other than it was a miracle, because that insanity that alcoholism created in me was gone. I just stopped. I don't want alcohol anymore.
Some things just can't be explained, can they, Shanna? And I honestly believe that we come here with, and we're given problems to sort out, but we're given those problems to try to make the world a better place for so many other people. And just hearing your story, for me, I think you just got to that point. The universe probably said, "Yay, she's finally got it," and that was that for you, and that gave you the credentials, I suppose, to go on and start Sober in the Country, to try and make such a big difference to people, particularly in the bush. And Shanna, I was interested to hear you say that bush people living in country towns won't turn up to an AA meeting, and I get that. So for the judgment and everything else that goes along with it. So Shanna, just before we get on to Sober in the Country, did you know Ali before that AA meeting, or did you form a strong friendship with her because you were like-minded, you'd been through the same thing?
Yeah, no, she wasn't a friend. I met her through AA. She now is a very dear friend, and she's now a director of our charity. So, no, that was our bond, was through AA. And as you would have seen me say on Australian Story in our documentary, the critical thing that shifted for me and made me realise I wasn't alone was I met this girl who walked and talked and looked and sounded like me. Yeah. She could have been my sister. And I went, oh my God, well, if you were an alcoholic and if you recovered, then shit, maybe I can too. Yeah. There was such a strong point of identification there for me, which was really important. So that was how our friendship began and remains in place to this day. Yeah. Yeah.
And so Tim played an integral role in your recovery. Ali played an integral role, and there was somebody else who helped along the way too. So who was that?
You mean Fleabag?
Yes, of course I mean Fleabag.
Absolutely, because I've been working from home in isolation. I've been doing everything in isolation for so long now, it's not even bloody funny. But the one constant is my little blue healer. Yeah, she's great. Fleabag has been through thick and thin with me, and she's 14 now, so gee whiz, she's seen the very best and the very worst of her mum.
So Sober in the Country was born in 2015, is that right?
It was. So when I was very first recovering, and that first year, so my first year in recovery was 2015, and I started just jotting down and writing down things when I wasn't bum up and head down in literature and learning how to save my own life and get sober. Mm-hmm. And I actually started to run a local recovery support meeting because everybody said to me, okay, you need to help other people in order to stay on the straight and narrow. You should probably start a meeting if there's not one there. And I went, that's a great idea. So I did that, amongst lots of other things. But as you mentioned just before, I was soon going to learn the hard way that people don't come to meetings in a small country town, not because they don't need them, but because they're not anonymous and they won't walk through the door. Yeah. So it was a big fat failure. It didn't work at all.
Mm-hmm. So you have your Facebook page, which is open to whoever wants to have a look and find out about Sober in the Country, but then you have a private group as well where they can go to that page and it's private and share their stories there if they don't want to be, don't want everything to be made public. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'll go back a step and I'll break it down for you. So I basically, when I realised doing real-time meetings at a local level in a small town wouldn't work, because it just doesn't, so I started blogging and speaking very cautiously. And over this 5-year period of my own recovery story, Sober in the Country was born, because I just saw this massive, great big hole in the rural space where people just can't, they don't know where to go, they don't know who to talk to, they don't know how to even begin the conversation. And there are so many barriers to people looking for and stepping up for and getting help that many of them just fall through the cracks and don't make it. It's ridiculous how many hurdles they've got to go past to get there. And I thought, well, if I can be part of simplifying that process by getting this conversation out on the table, I'll go first. I'll tell the truth of what it looks like and sounds like to be a high-functioning alcoholic in everybody's bloody midst. And I'll share the truth, and maybe it'll give others courage. And very, very quickly, so many people. So sorry, at that stage, all I had was just a Facebook page.
Yeah.
But what I was finding was that people were private messaging me saying, I love what you're doing, I love what you're saying, but I'm far too nervous to comment, but I just want you to know that I'm finding it really helpful. Please keep going. So from that space, I created a private group where I said, guys, I'm getting loads of comments from other people like me out there working full time but drinking too much, who don't know what to do, but you're all too embarrassed or too nervous to speak. So I've created this group over here. Come and have a chat on there if it makes you feel more safe. And that just quickly grew as well. So I had public Sober in the Country over here and then a little private group over here. And both of them just kept growing and growing. So the point is there was such a need and such a want. And I kind of just kept developing the two things. I just worked it out as I went. There was no one guiding me. I was just just working it out the hard way. But what was very apparent was that huge amounts of the rural population were identifying with me and seeing me as a voice that made sense to them. And so I just did what I could with what I had as a non-expert human, just a very regular country girl sharing the truth. And it just kept going and going. And then it was a magazine article, and then it was a radio interview, and then it was this, and then it was that. And I was always at great pains to say to people, I'm not representing any organisations, or I'm not presenting as the solution. I'm just presenting as the truth of what this thing can look like in our communities. And thank you for joining me with this chat. And we just kept going and going and going. And in the end, I could hardly keep up with it, Kel, because the need was just so massive, not just in my town, but it went to New South Wales, and then it went outside of our borders, and all of a sudden we've got a national conversation on the go. And I started to speak with our politicians to say, guys, this is what's happening. I wondered if you could help me in some way. And then I started going through awards processes because people could see that I'd been volunteering for years and years and impacting a lot of lives. And I was like a Rural Woman of the Year finalist over here, and then a Regional Woman of the Year finalist over there. And there's all this traction growing, but I couldn't get any funding. I couldn't get any help. I can't even tell you how much time I spent reaching out to local, federal or state or federal government. But that just went nowhere. I just went in circles. And in the end, I was like, rightio, I can't keep sustaining this, because I was now at year 5 of being a volunteer without a cent of income, working my guts out, like working 10-hour days now to help people. And I thought, well, shivers, what do I do now? And I ended up asking for help. I put a call out and said, guys, I'm going to make this thing a charity because I need help. I need help. And obviously, I'm not going to get it from federal or state MPs. Maybe it's time to bring it to a philanthropic level and ask.
Why do you think government weren't interested in helping you?
I just think they saw me as just one random chick out in the bush doing whatever I was doing. I don't think they still have any concept of how far and how wide our reach is, to be honest with you, Kel. I think that they don't. I don't think it's that they don't want to help by nature. I truly believe they've completely underestimated how far and how wide this conversation has gone and how deeply profound the need is in the rural space. And I'm not a political player. I'm not a political person. I am a little bit disruptive. I can agitate. I speak the truth. I don't think I'm a person who is politically pleasing. I don't know. To be honest, I think.
Sometimes I think you just have to have that one person come along and give you the credibility that you need to get other people to believe in your message.
Our Australian Story documentary went to air last November, and in that same week we were officially given the tick to be a national charity. And since then, so in the last 6 months, we've gone big time in the sense that we now have several really, really powerful philanthropic organisations have stepped up and made donations to help kick us along. They've acknowledged the critical nature of this work. And better than that, again, is the fact that I had until COVID-19 struck, I had been invited to literally travel rural Australia. I should be right now in Perth, and I was meant to be travelling the whole country in the next 7 months because I was getting invited by corporates, by the mining sector, by small community groups. So what it did, right, so this year has effectively validated everything I've been saying for 5 years, which is Sober in the Country is simply here to put a real face and a real voice to the truth of the alcohol culture and the cost that that's having on our rural community. We're not here to be prohibitionists. We're not here to say you can't enjoy a drink. We're here to say plenty of our mates actually can't safely do that, and there's a lot of our mates in trouble who don't know where to go or how to get help. And so I would say that what's happened in the last 6 months is we've really refined our message, and I've had to step up from Shanna the rowdy volunteer to Shanna the laser-focused CEO with a national voice. And I'm not mucking about anymore. Like, I'm getting really serious about what we're doing because lives are on the line. And I guess I'm growing into this role and this charity. And other people can see that growth, and they know now, they understand I've got a serious voice. And my objective in 2020, Kel, is to take that incredibly precious lived experience as a recovered alcoholic from to say this is the truth, this is the reality of what it's like to fight alcohol addiction in a rural space when you can't get help, you can't get support, you can't go to meetings. You don't qualify for government assistance because you've got a farm to run or children to put through boarding school, and you can't just take a month off and go to a detox facility. Like, the sets of challenges for the rural space are unbelievable. And, COVID-19 has actually really, really, in a really weird backhanded way, it's helped to reveal the truth of our national alcohol related issues, because suddenly everybody in Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne who's previously had access to just walking down the street and walking into a recovery meeting don't have that. And they're suddenly going, holy cow, we don't have people to talk to. What do we do now? What do we do now? And there's a lot of people falling through the gaps. And it's kind of given us an opportunity to say, well, actually that's what the normal way of operating is for country people. This is why we have been asking for a very, very long time now. What do we do here? We've got to fill that gap, I
wanted to ask, do you, through that private Facebook page, do you connect people with their own allies. You know, you had allies. So do you connect people with others that can help them?
So what we do there in our private page is we say to people, if you are really struggling and you would love a one-on-one support person or sponsor, please ask. Go for your life, because this is a huge network to draw upon. Yeah. And what will happen is, and then I say, if you are well into your recovery and you are stable and safe within yourself and you feel you're safe, you know, in a position to support someone, go for it. Yeah, so we totally encourage people to sheer off and work together. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, we also share heaps of resources. We say to the group, what did you find useful in terms of this book or that podcast or this online platform? So in that group, we have a bit of a theory that we don't for one moment, as I've said a million times and I'll always say it, we're not presenting as a solution. We want to be a conduit so that people can go and find their own solution, because we don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. Some people love AA, some people love smart recovery, some people love working with a sponsor, some people love random humans like Russell Brand or Hello Sunday Morning. There's actually so much available. So we just pump that information out and say, guys, if you want help, it is there, but you've got to go after it. So we just try to ensure we're giving people, you know, the info and the options. So we're sort of like it's almost like a referral thing, really. Yeah, so within our private group, we just share how we're going. It's all, the identification point of the group is that we have to all be rural or remote or regional professionals. Mm-hmm. So like agronomists or farmers or a local shop in town or a nurse or a doctor or whatever, people who are working flat out who don't have the opportunity to get welfare assistance or support, for example, but need it but can't get it. So we're trying to fill that little gap for those busy people who don't know where the hell else to go. Yeah, and it's very powerful. It's really beautiful.
Oh, yeah. And so many times people don't know where to turn. I actually listened to Russell Brand's book. I do a lot of driving, and I downloaded it through Audible, and it was so interesting. And I just saw another completely different side to him than what, you know, is portrayed in the media. I thought it was, I'm sure you've read it or listened to it, but I was really amazed that he had that depth about him. So yeah. Shanna.
He's a dude.
Yeah. And you know, it's that honest, it must have been so hard for you to bare your soul to complete strangers, and I take my hat off to you, because that just shows so much strength and courage from a human being to tell the truth about themselves and the ugliest parts of themselves. So
do you know something? You know something, Kel? I'll say this for the sake of hopefully somebody listening who needs to hear this. It was so much less intimidating than what I would have thought, and the thing is, it's exhausting to live in denial. It's exhausting to try and pretend you're okay when you're not. It's like living a double life. It's like maintaining two separate personalities. And, you know, that beautiful, beautiful saying, the truth sets you free, 100% applied to me. And as soon as I started walking and talking in the truth, I don't know, it was actually not hard for me. But I do think that also my set of circumstances, being the fact that I don't have kids and the fact that I didn't have an office environment or you know, a reputation as a local lawyer or police person to uphold or whatever. I was just a nothing. I am just a nothing, but I was like, I had nothing to lose, like nothing in the world. And so honestly, it was really, really, it was not a big deal. Once I had done it, actually, I'll give you an analogy that I use. And again, maybe this is encouraging for somebody. You know when you've got a gay friend who calls the dinner party to announce that they're gay and everyone sits down and there's awkward silence and the person says, okay, guys, I've got something I need to tell you. I'm actually gay. And everyone's like, duh, we knew that, you idiot. Pass the salt. Right?
Yeah.
That's what it's like. That is what it's like to come out as an alcoholic. Very few people stand in judgment or condemnation. Most people who are decent and kind humans go, well done, you idiot. It's about time you admitted that. How can we help you? And all of a sudden, your eyes are opened to the truth that this thing has been holding you utterly captive. And when you speak the truth, suddenly you can start to get well. You can start to honestly ask for help and seek support. And it's just, there's so much goodness in it that it really overrides. I'm not saying it's not very scary at first, it is, but most people find that once they go, there's no turning back, because it's just so much better than living a life of lies,
Yeah. Shanna, we've had a sort of brief conversation via email about this before, but I just want to talk to you about country pubs that quite often and they're across all of Australia. There's nothing else there except a pub and maybe a service station. So there's no police presence, and it seems like, sometimes especially young people think that's a ticket to go there to that country pub, write themselves off. They don't have a worry about getting home because they'll just drive home at 3 o'clock in the morning but I have, teenage children, and it terrifies me because we have a pub similar to that down a dirt road, and it's the party place, and I always drum into my kids, take your swag, stay there the night if you're going to, be drinking. But when there's adults driving, staying there till 3 o'clock in the morning and driving home, to me that just sends a terrifying message to those teenagers. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, oh gosh, Cal, something I've been really careful to do since day one with this whole chat is to ensure we're not demonising or throwing anyone under the bus. Rather, we're trying to just say, it's okay to say no, guys, we need blah, blah, blah. Really careful. But those are the conversations that have to be had in our communities and within our families, because alcohol abuse is so normalised in our outback communities and in our little rural towns and circles of friends. And it's just, it scares the hell out of me, because I was the person who would have laughed at my friend drink driving. I was the one who would have done the drink driving, because we all just turn a blind eye and we laugh it off. And what happens is, let's say there's a and I see this happen all the time, when there's a person who's brave enough or bold enough to say, no thanks, I'm driving, or no thanks, I don't drink, people really come down on them and judge them and carry on. And it's often people in our age group, which I find astonishing. But I don't think it's not that they're defective characters or bad people. It's just that we've spent so long normalising and glorifying drinking, and not just moderate drinking. I'm talking about alcoholic drinking. We have normalised that for so long in Australia that we've kind of forgotten what it even means. What is the difference between normal drinking and alcoholic drinking? And I jokingly said in my Opera House interview recently that I actually think half of Australia is an alcoholic, because normal standard drink that they recommend is safe is two drinks. And I don't know about anyone listening, but back when I was doing my big drinking, 2 drinks was enough to wash the dust down and nothing more. That is the colloquial way that we discuss it. And most of us in the bush would rather sit there and drink a dozen schooners and then maybe call it a night. We're big drinkers and we love it. And we measure our friends by how much they can drink and how often they're drinking. And we measure them by, we kind of regard it as a hero status if someone can drink their body weight and not vomit or pass out or fall over. We regard that as a badge of honour. When what we need to be doing is giving the badge of honour to our mate who says, no, I'm good, thanks, I've had enough. But we don't. We make fun of that mate. So there's a real cultural problem throughout our rural communities that I've been trying really hard to gently bring into the discussion for years now. Oh man, it's going to take some work, but yeah, we it's a cultural issue within ourselves. Yeah, on the home front, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
And I mean, I'm all for having fun, but I think what you're trying to teach people is to recognise when they do have a problem. So when enough is enough. And I loved when you said one drink was too many and 1,000 wasn't enough. And I thought that was a really huge statement and a clarifying statement.
Well, that's pretty much alcoholism defined. It's almost like as soon as you take the top off that first beer, you can't stop. Yeah. You can't stop. And so many country people, if you ask that question, I know most of my mates, I know so many of my mates who I adore, and they're not bad people at all. But they're the same, you know, once they start, they're going to go till they are Dunsky. Some people just are not capable of drinking moderately. And the problem is in our younger generations, like your kids and university students and whatnot, there's no maturity there. The brain is still developing and the risk-taking is out of control. And I think what you said just before, a really good point. If a responsible adult is at the pub stepping up and saying, actually, no, mate, you're going to stay in your square, or whatever it might be, and setting a good example, it's a wonderful thing to see. But you're right, unfortunately, what we do see a lot of times is the adults being just as boozy as the teenagers, and there's not even a gap. And as I said, it's a very fine line to walk because connection is critical. Gathering socially is so important for rural people. Without that connection, we're in big, big trouble. And so one of the big things I'm constantly trying to say is we don't ever want to take away people's ability to go to the pub and gather, but maybe we can look at it being a little bit less about getting blackout drunk and a bit more about just having a good old yarn, or maybe, I don't know, catching up on a morning activity at the bloody, I don't know, at the river for a spot of fishing, whatever it might be. But our culture is just so very much geared towards every single thing being about coming together around alcohol. It's always about the booze in the country because it's the pub or nothing really. It's an age old thing. Yeah.
Shanna, I could stay all day and talk to you, and I was so grateful that you agreed to chat with me because I think you have such an important message, and I'm really grateful for your time. Is there something you'd like to leave everybody with on a good note?
Oh, look, I think that I reckon rural people are the greatest people in the planet. I really do. I just have so much love for country people, and you know, my heartfelt wish is to always speak with love and always speak with compassion and kindness, and to never. I don't want anyone to ever think any of this is being said with judgment or whatever. That's the last thing I'm about. You know, but maybe just to encourage somebody if they're listening and if they think they've got a problem, know that they're not alone. I can't even begin to tell you how many people in this country are battling against alcohol abuse and addiction. And just to encourage our message, really, our take-home message is always simply, it's okay to say no. And if that's the one thing I can ram home, it's to just say next time you're at a pub or, well, actually that's not going to happen for a while, but when life returns to normal, you know, when you've got a mate who says they've had enough, leave it at that. Or when you've got someone who says no thanks, leave it at that, because you never, ever know what is underneath. You do not know the backstory. And sometimes the greatest act of friendship, you know, we can supply is by accepting our mates, whether they're big drinkers or not. We've just got to socially change the norm and just calm down, just accept it, and just, I think a future Australia in which we do not identify our mates by how much they drink would be an amazing place to get to. I think it's well and truly overdue that we change that dialogue and just grow up a bit as a nation and look after ourselves. And I mean, now more than ever, it's pretty obvious we need to be doing that. So, yeah, one little story at a time, I think will make a really positive culture shift. Because remember, Kel, people said that, remember once upon a time, cigarette smoking was our alcohol. You know, we advertised it, we glorified it, everybody did it, and you were a total weirdo if you didn't, until it became obvious it was killing vast percentages of our friends.
Well, we were very cool when we were cool when we were smoking.
Totally cool.
Yeah,
and again, our job is not to tell people they can or can't drink. That's not our job, but our job is to just make people aware that there are risks and there are a lot of lives on the line because of it. So maybe collectively we can look at that and make better choices. You know?
I'm hoping that the biggest thing people will get from your message is to recognise, Shanna, if they have a problem or not, and then start on the road to recovery. I think that's the main thing, you know, for me anyway, that I hope people consider and educate themselves and take that first step in saying, you know, I'm an alcoholic. So thank you so much, Shanna, and good luck with everything, and we'll keep in touch.
Sounds awesome, Kel. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for watching our video. I hope you enjoyed it, and please try to remember to just click on the subscribe button so we can keep you updated with everything that's happening. Thank you.